Hi there, and welcome back to Regional Art. We'll be exploring mark making, colour, texture and tone. In this series, I'm going to be sharing some simple, mindful ways that you can ground yourself in your art practice. We'll be exploring mark making, colour, texture and tone.
I'm starting with my go-to writing pen, the Uniball Eye Micro. This is a pen I reach for often because it feels reliable and responsive. First, I test its tonal gradients, seeing how light or dark the ink can go depending on the pressure. Then I explore nib control and line thickness, allowing myself to move slowly and intentionally. Here I'm stippling, gently challenging the pen on watercolour paper, and even here it holds up beautifully. Next, we have the Fude pen. It's all about movement and expression. This is a pen I really enjoy because it offers both thick and thin lines in a single tool, depending on the angle of the nib. Using the flat side creates bold, solid marks with a rich ink coverage. Rotating the nib allows for much finer, almost fine liner style lines. What I especially like is the space between those extremes, where the ink feels expressive, slightly dry, and full of character. With my square-ended Cotman brush by Winsor & Newton, I begin to soften things. This brush allows for cleaner mark making, gentle blending, and a sense of flow across the page. It's a shift from precision into something more fluid, and that contrast can be incredibly grounding. With watercolour, I begin by testing different concentrations and observe how water dilutes the medium in various ways. Moving from one colour into the other creates a soft transition. This is another way to blend on the page. Between the blue and the green, we then add that water to dilute this further down. And using the wet on wet approach, it really shows how freely the medium reacts on the page. I continue by pulling out the built-up colour into the gradient, gradually extending the pigment into layers while letting the page guide the movement. In contrast, I explore the dry brush. This gives a more textured control mark and highlights how versatile watercolour can be. I'm now laying down ultramarine in distinct concentrations. One area with fully pigmented application and the other placed slightly away using a more diluted mix. Leaving space between the two allows room for movement. I then work into that gap using clean water to gently draw the pigment outward and create a seamless transition between the intensities. While the area dries, I move on to the acrylics. I start with acrylic paint straight from the tube, using an impasto style. Here I return to stippling, but in a completely different medium, allowing the marks to take on a new weight and character. Next, I mix the acrylic directly on the page without any water. This creates a very different kind of blending compared to watercolour. Circular motions and short brush strokes work best here, helping the colours merge whilst still retaining their strength. An acrylic is highly concentrated, but it's also something to be diluted, and that behaves a bit more like watercolour, which makes it a useful alternative if watercolours aren't available to you. On a palette, I mix small acrylic swatches to demonstrate the tonal range that can be achieved when blending off the page. Starting with Mars Black and gradually introducing titanium white, I build a clear gradient that just shows how much control you can have over tone before the paint even touches the paper. My acrylic has now dried, which means I can begin layering new colours and building more three-dimensional texture on top. I go back to the Uniball Micro pen, and this is to demonstrate hatching and cross-hatching. Starting with sparse lines and gradually increasing their density allows the marks to mimic shadow and depth, so take your time here. Moving slowly helps you achieve a smoother tonal gradient rather than abrupt shifts. And if an area feels inconsistent, go back in, just as I do here, carefully observing the surface and adjusting where necessary. At the same time, it's important to be mindful of overworking tonal shading. Now feeling more confident, I go back to the Sailor Fude pen and begin to build up and extend the stippling, allowing those marks to grow outward and add further texture. I go into the method of scumbling. This is a way of building tone using loose marks rather than solid lines or blocks of colour. This approach allows the tone to build gradually and gives a soft, more organic result that feels less controlled and more expressive. I'm trying colour brushes for the first time here. This is from Posca. And this is also a reminder that a sketchbook is a safe place to explore, even when something is unfamiliar. And taking a scrap piece of paper can be the start. As I did before, I start by testing the control and texture of the medium. The colour lays down as a solid block, but it has that painterly marker-like quality. I introduce a second colour, a light blue, and challenge it against the deeper blue. The way they interact is very similar to acrylic. These pens dry quickly, which means the layering process can almost be immediate, allowing you to build depth without waiting between stages. From here, I move on to the Mono Twin pen by Tombow. I layer roughly half of the mark making over dried watercolour, allowing me to observe how the pen behaves both directly on the paper and on top of an existing medium. The lines remain crisp and controlled, with a slight fraying texture, similar to a permanent marker. The colour is solid, consistent, easy to work with, which makes it reliable for structured mark making over more fluid media. I want to introduce one of my favourite materials at the moment, Caran-Dash's NeoColour 2. What I love about this product is that it combines the qualities of both a crayon and a watercolour pencil into a single medium. Applied dry, it offers a gritty, waxy texture, but when water is added, the pigment blends out smoothly into a highly saturated wash. Now let's move from exploration into application. Everything you see here was built slowly, using simple marks, limited materials, and gentle repetition. The focus isn't on skill or experience, so I'm giving yourself permission to explore and respond to the page as you go. Today's prompt is fill the page with circles. You don't need to work in the same way, use the same materials, or arrive at the same result. What matters is that this approach is achievable, you too can follow along, and it's adaptable and can be open to your own pace and interpretation. The focus isn't on skill or experience, it's on giving yourself permission to explore and respond to the page as you go. The prompt can be interpreted very literally, through linear outlines, solid shapes, or tonal three-dimensional shading. I wanted to apply what I had learnt earlier, about blending it into a single hue into another, and I chose blue for its calming grounding qualities. There's something inherently gentle and approachable about both the colour and the shape, almost friendly, as if it were human. The circles begin small, which reflects that initial hesitation, that moment of not quite knowing where to start on the page. As I continue, the page starts to feel less daunting. I allow the circles to grow larger, varying their scale to fill the space more quickly and confidently. Larger circles are contrasted with smaller ones, alongside more abstract blending and different ways of interpreting the form. I start to look deeper, finding circles within lines, circles within circles, and shapes that suggest a circle without fully defining one. Some emerge through repetition, others through layering, and some appear entirely by accident, formed by the splatter of a fully loaded paintbrush. As I became more confident working at a larger scale, I began layering new circular forms over the top, which naturally developed a greater sense of depth and compositional interest. Directional lines started to emerge, giving the page movement and energy. It became far more exciting and vibrant than I had initially intended, especially considering I began by trying to control the page through uniformity. This happened because control often comes from uncertainty, wanting the page to feel staged and predictable at the start. That letting go is so important. Once the page no longer feels intimidating, it becomes a space for exploration, rather than something to manage. This is the final page, built from a very simple prompt, step by step. This page is a reminder that you don't need a complex idea to begin, just a single shape, repeated with curiosity. When you allow yourself to respond to what's already there, the work often becomes richer than anything you could have planned. The prompt stays simple, and let curiosity lead rather than expectation.
Thank you for spending this time with me. This page doesn't need to be finished. This is a record of exploration. If you'd like to continue, the next part of the series builds on what we've already started, adding new layers and approaches to the next few pages.